All right. Let's get back into some mobile mode now. We've got Sam Basu. He is a technologist, author, speaker, and Microsoft MVP, gadget lover, and Telerik developer advocate at Progress. That's a mouthful. With a long developer background, he now spends much of his time advocating modern web and mobile development platforms on Microsoft and Telerik technology stacks. His spare time calls for travel, fast cars, cricket, and culinary adventures. And you can find him all over the interwebs. He's got quite the presence, and I'm really excited for this chat. So, thank you, Sam.
All right, thank you. All right, can everyone hear me? Are we good? All right, good morning, and welcome back again to the inaugural Method Conference. All of you have taken time away, a day away from your busy life to come and hang out with us. We appreciate that, and you're all awesome. And a big shout out to Mike and Shauna and Tim and everybody who's been involved in putting this together. Conference organization it's tricky business. It's a lot of work, so a big shout out to them. Thank you, folks. If this is what it is on year one, you have a great future coming up. All right, cool. Let's talk about mobile stuff this morning. My name is Sam Basu. I am a developer advocate for Progress Software. You may know us for the things we build. That's a lot of Telerik UI for all of your .NET stuff, Kendo UI for your JavaScript stuff, Sitefinity, Fiddler. We are all about developer productivity. I think I put out some stickers there on that table if you want to grab. This is my social handle for pretty much everywhere, Twitter, GitHub, Skype, so you know where to get hold of me, okay? All right, let's start with some maps. So all of us here live on this tiny island sandwiched between the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans. That pin up there, that's where I am at, up north with the 5 Great Lakes. There's Lake Erie, and there's actually a place called Erie, Pennsylvania. That's where I am at. It's a tiny slice of Pennsylvania between Ohio and New York. I like joking that I can get on a boat, and I can be in Canada in about 30 minutes if I go north. But if I have to drive to Philly, which is in the same state, I have to come down and across. It's like a 7.5-hour drive, so it's a big state. So I'm for sure, I'm glad to be here today. Beautiful weather, and I appreciate all of you. Now let's overlay the map. Does anyone know what these red dots are? Anyone? It's coronavirus. And more than likely, it's going to be everywhere, and we're all going to die. So let's all eat and drink and be merry. I'm kidding. That's a horrible joke. We are going to be fine. Let's just all be careful. Let's just wash hands. It's amazing how much we touch our faces. Let's just not do any of that. We had a wonderful speaker dinner yesterday, and let's just say there were lots of handshakes and hugs. Let's not do any of that today, okay? Yeah, none of that. No, we're going to be fine. All right, so moving on from maps to cakes. Mike is probably questioning his life choices, like, who is this guy that I invited? But if it's your birthday, and if I show up at your door with all of this and say, go make yourself a cake, that's not very nice, right? To add to that, there is no fixed recipe. You can do your own thing. But that's kind of what we have done to ourselves in the mobile space for the past decade, right? It's complicated. Morgan was talking about it this morning. Mobile is hard, and as developers, one of the things we like is choice. We like choice in our technology platforms, in our stacks, and to be able to build stuff the way we want until it gets to a point where we have too much choice, and then we are crippled. And we are always guessing if we are doing the right thing. And part of what I think makes mobile hard is just the plethora of platforms and devices and form factors that you have. But also, unless you're working at a startup or if you're an indie, this may not be the only thing you're doing, right? You're building desktop applications to run your businesses, web apps, IoT, AR, VR, whatever else. So you're trying to mix and match and trying to see what fits with your technology stack, with what else you are doing, and you wanted to code share a little bit because it's good to be lazy. It's good to be sharing code between different types of application platforms. So we have about 55 minutes left. I'm going to try to go through kind of an overview of the broad ways to build for mobile today. Apparently, I'm the guy standing between you and the taco bar, so I'm pretty sure I'm going to be tackled down if I go over. So let's try to get a brief overview. I'm going to try to show you maybe some demos that are on the edge cases. So bear with me. Let's talk about stuff for the next like 20 minutes or so, and then I'll show you some demos. So this is where I think we kind of are. The top 5 broad ways to build for mobile today. I'm sure there are more outliers here and there, but these are the kind of the broad things. So 3 major platforms we're talking about: iOS, Android, and Windows. And by Windows, I don't mean Windows Phone. That's been dead like many times over. But you can obviously build for native apps, right? And this is where Apple, Microsoft, and Google will give you native SDKs, native platforms to build on. And it's great. You're closest to the metal, wonderful experience everywhere. But it's just hard, right? It is difficult for a single developer to understand all 3 stacks. It's even difficult for an enterprise to have 3 different teams that build 3 different apps and 3 different code bases towards the single thing. So this is hard. I'm not saying don't do native, but if you have the time and resources and if it calls for it, then absolutely. But otherwise, it's 2020. Hopefully, you're looking to build like cross-platform solutions where you can leverage maybe not the same code base, but some assets between platforms. So let's talk about some of the cross-platform approaches. The lowest hanging fruit is mobile web, right? If you have a website today, I've been known to like fall off podiums, so it's going to make for a nice video. I like walking around. So if you have a website today, there is no reason to not have it work nicely on a mobile form factor. There are lots of frameworks, pretty much everything open source that helps you out and do stuff that's mobile friendly. Obviously, all the SPA frameworks, the Angular, Vue, Twitter Bootstrap, we make Kinder UI, Blazor. There's a lot of different ways in which you can make mobile web, so that maybe it's your first step to make your website work nicely on a mobile form factor. You could take the mobile web approach to an extreme, and that's PWAs, Progressive Web Apps. This is where your mobile website starts being a very good citizen on a mobile device. You can pin things to your home screen. You can have service workers running. You can have push notifications. It's beautiful. So that's really the taking mobile web to the extreme. If you do want to keep using web technologies, though, there are a few options. One is the hybrid. This is where we started with Apache. No, we started with PhoneGap, and then it was called Apache Cordova. Again, legit approach to building hybrid apps. You're using HTML, CSS, JavaScript, building an app, putting it in the store. It's just not purely native because it's running inside of a web browser shell. And again, if you do a good job, the user should not notice, but if you're concerned about like down to a millisecond performance, that's not going to be what it gets you. So in the last few years, this whole concept of JavaScript native apps has really become popular because you are leveraging JavaScript and TypeScript and other languages, bringing in your SPA frameworks, and instead of building a web shell, you are truly building a native app. Because some of it boils down to the question of what exactly is a native app? At what point are we going to call it a native app? I really like the way, like the Xamarin folks, I'll talk about that, they have always defined native in 3 ways. Does your app have native UI for that platform? Does your app have native API access for all of the device features? And does your app have native performance, so it doesn't get in the way of how your app functions? So if those are the 3 things we are considering native, then the JavaScript native land will get you there. I'll talk about NativeScript. I'll talk about React Native. Again, lots of choices. And then if you have to do the cross-compile solution, the .NET solutions, again, this has also been developing quite a bit. Xamarin is easy. We'll talk about Uno platform. There's also Flutter. So lots of different ways in which you can boil down code from higher-level languages and make them native, make them work on these platforms, right? So let's kind of dive into each of these things, and I'm going to try to show you some edge cases. Any questions, any concerns so far? Am I missing anything broadly? OK. Let's start with the .NET stack. How many of you in the room, by the way, do .NET or Microsoft development? OK, some of you. And how many of you write JavaScript every day? OK, so fair balance. I'm going to try to maybe cover both sides of the story. Let's start with .NET. So .NET has evolved a lot. I'm sure you have seen maybe some of these slides from Microsoft. It's your platform to build just about everything now. This is .NET as we stand today. This purple box is what .NET Framework has been for the last like 15, 17 years. All of your Windows stuff runs just fine. Web stuff runs just fine. But it got to be a little too big. So .NET Core is about 4 years old. This is lean. This is cross-platform. It's modular. This is for the first time you're taking .NET outside of Windows, and it works. And then Mono is a port of .NET onto other platforms. And Mono has been around for 15 years. It's a really rich API canvas. And Xamarin was an acquisition Microsoft did back in like 2016. And that opens up a lot of the story that they tell nowadays, like you can build iOS and Android applications. So with .NET, with all of these 3 pillars, and these are like base class libraries, there are a few more, things like Unity. So you really can build a large set of applications and different platforms that you can target. And the tools of our trade have come a long way. It's not just Visual Studio on Windows anymore. I use Visual Studio on a Mac, and it still crashes probably 2 or 3 times a week, but that's nothing. Compared to Visual Studio. Things have evolved. VS Code is wonderful. It's lightweight, works everywhere. This is .NET as we are looking at end of 2020, hopefully. Because .NET started getting a little fragmented, right? So they're trying to unify it all into what's called .NET 5. And this will be fun and interesting because it's a lot of work behind the scenes. Apparently, when you create a file new project, a new .NET application, you're going to have switchable runtimes, and they're going to figure out stuff behind the scenes to get you all the pieces of .NET that you need. But this is in the works. Hopefully, it hits like beta October timeframe, November timeframe, and then we'll have it. So again, unification is coming back to .NET. All right, let's talk about Xamarin, since we are talking .NET. So Xamarin started probably 5 or 6 years back, and I think they make it really, really easy. Really compelling story, especially since they were acquired by Microsoft, truly native cross-platform apps, right? And one of the problems with Xamarin was it was expensive. To start off, it was like $1,000 per developer per platform. And then Microsoft took over and said, yeah, it's free for everybody. It's open source. So this is where Xamarin kind of started. This is what we call Xamarin iOS or Xamarin Android. For the .NET developers in the room, we love to write C#. So you get to write some shared logic between the different platforms, but you are building the heads separately. So iOS, Android, and Windows, you're building it separately. But good first step in the right direction. But again, as a .NET developer, maybe you don't want to know a lot about iOS or Android UI. So this next approach is where things got really popular, because now, in addition to a C# layer, you also have a shared UI layer, which is incredibly difficult to do, because these are very different platforms we are talking about. So can you get away writing the abstracted UI? For the most part, yes, but it really helps to know some of the native land. And you can go dip into native land anytime you want from Xamarin.Forms. So now you have abstractions over not just the logic, but also some UI code. And the abstraction is XAML. That's the markup. No matter what you do, though, Xamarin does not get in the way of your performance. So it's really native. Comes down to APK packages and .app packages, everything. I mean, you don't even have to do just-in-time for Android anymore. Everything can be pre-compiled, AOT, and it's really, really good. Now, every one of our mobile devices are loaded with sensors, right? Cameras, geolocation, everything. How do you get access to those? You don't want to write iOS or Android or Java code. This is what you use. There used to be like several different options. Now they have kind of combined it all. It's one NuGet package that you get and gets you access to all of like 30 or so APIs for every device. And you're writing C# for iOS or Android, which is really nice. MVVM is a design pattern, model view view model. This is something that works really well with XAML and C# type code bases. We have seen this work with WPF and UWP and other things. So this works with Xamarin.Forms as well. Some of it is baked in, and it does involve a little bit of complexity that you're bringing in. But if you're working in a bigger team, this may be something that you want to bring in. It just helps with testability and just gives you a little bit of sanity over your code base. So that works very nicely with Xamarin.Forms. Now, everything Microsoft does nowadays is pretty much out in the open. So anything ASP.NET, anything Xamarin, anything Azure, it's pretty much all open source. It's free. I actually take a look at their daily builds on Xamarin.Forms. It's big, but you can build it locally, and you can contribute back. They're very open to pull requests. Now, as you are building your applications, I'm going to mention a couple of things here. I'm obviously biased, but we make Telerik UI for all things .NET. And so my point is there is a lot of help on the UI stack. when you start shipping applications professionally, you should not be rediscovering the wheel because it takes a lot of work. So this is us trying to help out Xamarin developers. There's other toolkits as well. So please take a look around. And my point is, if you can get away building grids and charts and side drawers by hand, it's better. You'll be much more productive. So that's with the .NET stack. Any questions? Anything with Xamarin that you have heard of late? No? We'll talk about some of the edge cases. Okay? Let's talk about the JavaScript stack. And I'm going to start again with what I started when I first started with our company. There's a framework that we maintain called Kenda UI. And this is a simple HTML5 JavaScript front-end library that is for different types of web and mobile applications. And things used to be so simple back in the days. We just had a jQuery dependency, and it worked. But over the years, we have had to rediscover Kenda UI 4 times over. Now we make components for Angular, React, and Vue. Because again, we don't want to hold back developers. So again, the point is there's a lot of UI help for web or .NET technologies. Let's talk about some of the web approaches, PWAs. This is something Google started pushing, and Microsoft is all in with PWAs. Surprisingly, Apple is kind of grudgingly in as well with Safari. But this is, I mean, you get the idea from this screenshot from Google. It's fast. It's reliable. It's web applications which can do offline sync, which take care of the caching. You can have little service workers running, which is a little bit of JavaScript code running in the background, and it lets you do like a data fetch or a push notification, and it's just a nicer experience. But you are still using the web as your distribution medium. So this does not get you into the app stores. This is where literally it's just a mobile web application. But the user can pin your application to the home screen, which is like precious real estate, and then you can do push notifications and other things. There's a lot of help with building PWAs as well. Microsoft actually makes an open source community toolkit called PWA Builder, which is really nice because it kind of gets you started towards building a PWA. Technically, every website could be a PWA. It's questionable whether they should. But if you start there, they're going to tell you that, oh, your site needs like an app manifest file where you can declare all of the things your app needs. And then they'll help you write a service worker and do other things before you make that a full-on PWA. Google makes this thing called Lighthouse, which is actually embedded in your Chrome DevTools, and it's really nice. You can bring in any of the SPA frameworks, Angular, React, Kenda UI, Blazor, we'll talk about that. So there's a lot of help when it comes to building PWAs, at least the UI part of it, and then you write JavaScript to make it functional. So that's with the PWAs, but again, you are still using the web. This is a screenshot of PWA Builder, which I encourage you guys to check it out. I'll show you if I can have time, but it's really a nice like stepping stone to getting your website to be a PWA. This is Cordova. This is back in the days, like 2010 timeframe. PhoneGap used to be super popular. Everybody was doing it. You are writing HTML, CSS, JavaScript, bundling it up into an app package and throwing it in the App Store, and you get, I forget what they were called, like plugins, and you get access to all of the device features, just like we talked about with Xamarin. So there's nothing limiting you except it's just not a real native app. But again, if you are writing a line of business application, this is still a legit strategy, right? It may not be like down to a millisecond performance, but maybe you don't care. And again, if you do a good job, if you simplify your visual tree and how you lay things out, it really is fine. And if you're doing Apache Cordova, there is a lot of help as well. This is one that I recommend, Ionic framework, which is really good for building PWAs, building some sanity into your hybrid solution. Let's talk about the JavaScript native side of the family. Any questions so far? I'm going really fast. Any questions so far? I can dance. All right. All right, let's talk about JavaScript native. This is where we want to write JavaScript or TypeScript, but we don't want it to be a real web application. We want it to be a native application. And by that, I mean, really, first thing is native UI. Can you paint UI for iOS and Android from a JavaScript-based code base? And the answer is yes. So this is something actually we maintain. It's an open source framework. It is for building native iOS and Android applications with Angular. We actually work really well with Google, so all of the CLI tools work everywhere. With Vue, so you can bring in your SPA frameworks as you need to. If you want to do straight up JavaScript or TypeScript, that's fine too. But we will do pretty much exactly what Xamarin does. At runtime, we turn around and we look at your markup, which is a flavor of XML or HTML, and we render corresponding native elements on iOS or Android, right? So, and then the runtime is a JavaScript bridge. So this concept has been done many times over. It's proven, it's fast, it's reliable, so it's here to stay. If you are building web applications with React, this is for you because it really works. This is where you're using like the JSX style of programming, which maybe personally I'm not the biggest fan of. You're putting a little bit of HTML inside of your JavaScript, but again, they're doing the same thing. They turn around and render native UI on iOS or Android, and it's fast, it's performant, so why not? There's a lot of React Native stuff out there. In fact, if you use pretty much like 90% of Microsoft apps on iOS or Android, guess what they're written in? React Native, which does not sit well with the Xamarin folks, because it's the same company, but again, they're free to choose whatever works. So a lot of the Microsoft apps are actually, all of Office is now pretty much written in React Native. So that gives you some validation that it's here to stay. I think Facebook recently redid Messenger in a few things, in a few different ways, and then people were questioning, but it's fine. It's all going to be good. This is Flutter, right? So Flutter hit 1.0, I think, late last year, and I think they're like 1.2 or 1.3 right now. This is beautiful if you're OK writing Dart, right? And again, I mean, I see some of the hesitation, but it's a object-oriented programming language, and how difficult can a language be? So if you can pick that up, this is very nice. The dev experience is real nice. One of the things that we consider a lot is just the dev loop. Like, how quickly can I make some changes and I see it on an emulator, on a real device? And Flutter and React Native and NativeScript, these guys do a very good job. Microsoft is catching up a little bit with the Xamarin's tooling. But this is Dart, and one of the things that people get kind of little hung up over is this really native? And the answer is, if you're writing an Android application with Flutter, it is absolutely native, because they have redone all of Android UI in Dart. If you are writing iOS, I mean, you do get the Cupertino themes and the material design, but it's a little bit of a mixed bag because they are painting pixels with something called Skia Sharp, right? But again, it's performant, so maybe it doesn't matter all that much. But again, if Dart is your thing, take a look at Flutter. Now let's talk about some of the edge cases of things bleeding over from not just mobile onto desktop, onto web, and other things. Any questions so far? You all awake? Good. All right. Dual screen devices. This thing is coming at us. Samsung took a few steps. This is classic Microsoft. They came out a few months back to say, next year, so holiday 2020, we're going to see some devices. That guy is the Surface Duo, and that thing is Surface Neo. The Duo runs Android. The Neo runs 10X, Windows 10X, which is a variant of Windows. And essentially, dual screen brings in few more considerations. So if you have a single screen mobile app today, it's going to work fine, but it's going to only show up like on the left-hand side screen or on the top screen. It's not going to be a nice experience. So you almost have to rethink your application to take care or to maybe utilize the two screens. Like, is it going to be like a master detail view? Is it going to be like a companion view? So there's a lot going on, and this is in the works, and this will light up holiday 2020. I, as a technologist, like, I would love for these things to be working and be successful. But again, this is the classic Microsoft, where they will have a new platform, and they expect developers to build apps to make it successful. And I'm like, yeah, it should be the other way around. You make it successful, then we'll come. But we'll see. But this is definitely here to stay. All of your UWP apps will work just fine. All of your Xamarin applications will work just fine. So new surfaces to kind of run our applications on. Which brings us to UWP, which is Microsoft's Universal Windows Platform. And it's universal only within Windows. But it's quite a bit, right? So it's not the phone anymore, but it's all the laptops, the Xboxes, the Surface Hubs. Anyone seen a Surface Hub? We have one in our HQ. It's like a huge 80-inch screen, and you can touch and you can draw. It's nice for meetings. HoloLens, I have a demo where I don't have it here, but any UWP app, it'll run fine on a HoloLens. It just looks flat. It's 2D. You really should be using like Unity to make it 3D and pop out. But I mean, it's a lot of form factors that you're talking about with the UWP. It's a flavor of XAML that doesn't quite agree with Xamarin.Forms, but again, as a developer, it doesn't really matter. And they are kind of trying to separate WinUI, like Windows UI, and separating it from the Windows stack, because that gets them into trouble. So they want to push out updates without the Windows updates. So that's WinUI, and that's something they're working on. Again, if you are a .NET developer, if you want to do .NET and XAML and C#, then this thing will get you access to every Windows device. And then I'll talk about there are ways to take this to other platforms as well. Again, if you're doing UWP, we make a suite which is completely open source and it's free. So again, the point is, if you're building web stuff, .NET stuff, there's a lot of UI help that you can get right out of the box. Now let's talk about some of the other things. I think Jordan mentioned it this morning. This is OS X. Apple has a similar problem that Microsoft has. Everybody wants to write for iOS. Not too many people want to write for the Mac store, right? So this is their approach to bring iPad apps into the Mac desktop. And it's still something that's been worked on. And the good news is all of these, I mean, they had probably 4 or half a dozen apps working nicely that are first-party apps working nicely on a Mac desktop. And all of these iOS applications can actually be written in Xamarin.Forms. So you just have a bigger surface area. Maybe you have the hamburger menu. Maybe you take care of, or you utilize the extra surface area in some way, and you make an app that works on both the iPad, iOS, and the Mac desktop. Xamarin.Forms, again, since this was open sourced back in 2016, essentially here's what's happening. When we write the shared UI layer, it's an abstraction. And there's a little piece of code called the renderer that sits behind that abstraction. And at runtime, it translates the list view or a drop-down or a button into native iOS or Android code, right? So since that's been open source, the community has stepped up and said, we can write renderers for other things. So there are now renderers for macOS, renderers for Linux, GDK, and WPF as well. Anybody know this guy, Tizen? So Samsung, if you are buying a Samsung device that does not run Android, is running Tizen. So your refrigerator and your TV at home runs Tizen, and you can run Xamarin.Forms on it. So again, things are evolving with the Xamarin space as well. Nice to have some flexibility. Then comes an Uno platform. I'm sorry, I'm throwing a lot of things at you guys, but again, the point is to just keep these things in the back of your mind, that there are solutions, there are options around no matter what stack you pick. And again, the tooling is pretty mature everywhere. The API access is nice. So these are a bunch of really smart folks out of Montreal in Canada. I've been to their offices. They have been building iOS and Android apps for a long time, and they built their own kind of homegrown factory of renderers, which is taking UWP XAML and making it work on iOS and Android. So this gives you a way out. If you don't want to do Xamarin.Forms for some reason, then this is another flavor of XAML that reaches to iOS and Android, right? So this thing is really nice. And they do use Mono and Xamarin under the covers, so very similar tech, just the UI stack is different. Now, I'm going to show my age here. You might need hugs like me if you did this, right? Back in the days. I did like a year and a half of this. We all know what happened. So Steve Jobs wrote that scathing letter where he said Flash sucks, and yes, it had some security problems, and the whole plugins industry just kind of went away. Those of us who did Silverlight really actually liked the dev experience. The tooling was great. It was XAML, C#, it was Visual Studio, it was great. So can we have some of it back on the web, please? And the answer is yes, but really early days. And that's because of this guy that's coming up. It's WebAssembly. Thankfully, no one person or company owns it. This was actually something that the Mozilla guys started pushing. It's an open web standard, right? So everybody is behind it. All of the evergreen browsers will do it. So essentially what this is a low-level, not quite assembly, but a low-level language for describing a program, right? And this low-level language can be executed natively by your browser. So just the way a browser has a JavaScript engine, it executes JavaScript code, it can execute WebAssembly code natively. So you get a big boost of performance. And the good news is you can compile down a lot of high-level languages into WebAssembly now. It started with like C and C++ and Rust and Go. And now you're talking C# and F# as well. So now you can bring real C# code to the browser and make it work nicely. So that's what's kind of happening in the Microsoft space a lot. You may be hearing stuff about Blazor, which if you do ASP.NET, that's your way to run C# front and back. Because a lot of enterprises that have traditionally been like .NET shops, you have done kind of .NET to the back end now, and you're picking up a SPA framework to do Angular React on the front end. And that does not make Microsoft comfortable. So they are wanting to make C# work natively in the browser. Blazor is going to be great. It's server-side right now, but it will be fully client-side with WebAssembly starting middle of this year. And that has interesting connotations for what it means for mobile and PWAs, because you can build mobile stuff now with Blazor. And essentially, Mono is the one that's doing the heavy lifting. It's compiling your IL down into WebAssembly using some optimizers. And it's really nice. It is still a lot of static compilation, but they're getting to ahead of time. And they're working on linkers as we speak. So this thing is going to keep on growing. So you can build PWAs with Blazor really nicely. OK, so that's all I had with the different types of technologies. Let me spend another 10 minutes talking about some of the daily pain of mobile development, right? Because this is difficult, no matter how you do it. So let me go through some of the tools that I use. I'm sure there's more that I'm missing. But let's talk about deployment. So you have started coding. You want to see your app working. How do you go about it? Well, if you're on a Mac and if you're building iOS, it's easy because you have Xcode. And this is a question we get a lot if you're doing like Xamarin. Do you need a Mac to build iOS? And the answer is yes and no. Yes, because it needs to be an app package that's native, but no is because Apple would want you to be building an iOS app that is built with Xcode, licensed to the same developer that has the App Store account, and nobody can get you around that. So there are some things you can do. You can throw in a Mac somewhere on your network. You can do Mac in the cloud just to do a build. Microsoft actually has some options of doing like a cloud build to build your iOS apps. But again, if you're on a Mac, if your IDE can get to Xcode, then you're fine. You're going to see all of the iOS simulators, and life is good. If you are doing iOS development, though, and if you're on Windows, this thing is nice. It's essentially just a stream of the iOS simulator. Macs will, I mean, don't quote me, Macs will likely never get a touch, and I don't want them to because I don't like smudges on my screen, but Windows devices do have touch. So you can run this thing, and you can pinch and zoom around. You can use this like the way your mobile users are going to use your app. So this is nice. And you don't have to look at the Mac ever. You can just hit F5 from Windows, and it just works. Android, it's just hard. There's a lot of emulators, and almost all of them come as virtual hard drives. I had an older MacBook that just ran out of space because everything was like a hard drive, and everything is a few gigabytes. There's a lot of them out there. The Android emulator has come a long way. It's faster. It doesn't take 10 minutes anymore. There's Genymotion. There's other things. If you're on Windows, though, and if you're doing Android development, they actually enabled Hyper-V. From Windows 10 sometime in spring of last year. So you can do like Docker development with Android. You don't have to switch around. So that's nice. Gives you a speed boost as well. If you're doing Xamarin, then how do you get your apps? This was something they started doing where you can have an app on iOS or Android. You can scan a QR code, and it gets your app into the phone wirelessly, because Apple lets you jump through a bunch of hoops. But this is not working out very well for any complex apps. So they are, I think, going to do away with this. This is a solution. This is Xamarin.Forms Hot Reload. So essentially, you pull up your iOS or your Android emulator. You make some code changes, both XAML and C#. They keep things in memory, and they push it out. So this is them trying to really fasten up the dev loop, so you can see your code changes working as quickly as possible on the emulators or simulators. If you are doing anything with the web stuff, pretty much everybody has the same story. I'm showing you here NativeScript. Again, as you make code changes, they show up. React Native has the exact same story. Flutter has a really good story. A lot of them, like for NativeScript and React Native, they're using what's called Webpack, which is great for packaging up your components so they know exactly which component you're touching, and they can just change up that part of the UI. So it comes out of the box, nicely configured with CLIs. If you ask me to configure Webpack, I'm just going to drop everything and run away, because it's difficult. But again, it's kind of baked in out of the box, so you don't have to do much. Cloud. Should you use the cloud? No, you don't have to. But again, if you're looking to give people the continuity of experience of going from one device to another and onto other things, you need a cloud backend, which you can use it however you want. It could be SQL Server under your desk, but as long as you have services to back it up, you're good. If you're on Microsoft land, however, Azure is just a huge infrastructure of all things cloud you can think of. When you go onto the Azure website and do the drop-down for the products and services, like, oh my God, it just does everything under the sun. But this is one thing I'm actually fond of. This is Azure Cognitive Services. If you want to bring in a little bit of intelligence into your app, just to kind of keep your users engaged, this is nice because it does not actually need you to know machine learning. You don't have to know the math. You can make a RESTful call, and you can have vision, you can have speech. Those things can be nicely customized for you. So take a look at this if this is something you want to use in your apps. Others have similar stories. AWS would love for you to use their mobile hub and do push notifications and storage and services and Lambdas and Azure functions. They're all the same. So bring these things in as you see fit. This is another backend as a service that you can host on Azure or AWS. Works the same way. And again, it gives you that CDN access. It gives you that serverless architecture that you're looking for if you want to use it from your mobile app. DevOps. Mobile is hard. It's just not build and ship once and forget about it. It's just a constant loop, right? So how do you do this? If you are, again, in the Microsoft stack, there are other solutions outside of it. I'm mentioning one that I really like. This is Visual Studio App Center. And this is, again, a cloud offering that does CI/CD builds for you, that does an enterprise distribution if you don't want to go to the stores. It does analytics on how your app is doing, and it works across like different types of platforms. So this is something I use, and I'm fond of it. So quick shout out to them. If you are doing any real public-facing app dev, though, it's really hard to test on every Android device. There's just so many of them out there. So this is actually a paid service. This is not free, but at this point, you are building an enterprise app, and you may be OK giving them a little bit of money. This is actually in Boston. They have a lab where they have racks and racks of really old Android devices. And if you send them your app package, they'll run it on those Android devices. There's a little camera that takes the picture, and they'll send you screenshots of how it's doing. So this is really nice if you want to hit every Android device under the sun. Again, analytics, it's all there for you to use. Let's talk about network stuff, because again, this is reality for mobile devs. People with mobile phones, we often go in and out of networks, right? Getting into a plane, or we lose Wi-Fi. So you should never be in doubt as to what's going on behind the scenes in your app. So there's some help that shows you how that works. Anyone heard of Fiddler? Yeah, those of you on Windows may be using this for years now. We made this. It was a WPF app, MEF-based solution, and it worked great. The Google Chrome DevTools will give you all of that, but this is a little advanced. This is where you get to fake the network proxy. You get to record things. You get to look under HTTPS. So it's a little more advanced and powerful. We have since redone Fiddler. We have separated the Fiddler UI from the actual engine, and the engine now works on .NET Core. So we can actually run this everywhere. We have a new UI for Fiddler, which is actually funny. It's written in Angular, actually, but it runs everywhere. So you can get Fiddler for Mac and Linux as well. That shows you exactly what's going on in your network stack. If you're dealing with APIs of any type within your team, outside of your team, cloud-based, this is great. This is from Google Postman. It lets you fake those authentication things that are just hard to deal with, right? So again, use all of this stuff. Write code in these things before you bring it into your app, so you just have more confidence as to how things are working. I use this one a lot. There are a few solutions, but this one is for you to wirelessly show your phone screen on a bigger, like on your computer or on a screen like this. So if you're doing like demos for clients, this is great to show them prototypes. So it's just wirelessly casting your mobile device on a screen. OK, so we are 20 minutes out. I've been talking way too much. Any questions so far? Are we good? Let's show you some scary stuff. No, it's just fun stuff, right? All right. Let's begin with Visual Studio. All right, let's begin with this one here. Singing? OK. I will bump up fonts, and you guys tell me if that's big enough. Okay, so this what you see is a pretty standard Xamarin.Forms. Oops, no, I don't want to update Visual Studio right now. Thank you. Okay, so this is a Xamarin.Forms solution. This is kind of a classic look that you get. This one here is a .NET standard library, so it's independent of platforms. It lets you have the same library in your web app, in your mobile app, in your desktop app. It's a nice way to share your code. And then you have platform-specific things for iOS, Android, and whatever other devices that you might have. So here's a super simple app, and I want to showcase a couple of things here. This is where I'm starting up. All my code is in the shared repository. There is no iOS or Android-specific stuff here. So this is a XAML and C# code base. So I have my main page, which is where things start out. And this is super fancy code. I'm newing up 5 strings, and I want to show that list of strings. I think Jordan did this morning. Like, it's nice to, this is like hello world for mobile apps. Show me a list of things, right? So here's my list, and I am throwing in a little UI in front of it. There's a list view, and I'm setting the view, the source property of the list view to my source. So here's my XAML, which looks busy, but essentially is just like one list view, and it has some data templates, so I can show the list of the strings and then some buttons. So let's run this thing, and I'll show you what I'm talking about, just to give you a little bit of flexibility. Now this is, again, Visual Studio, so it knows that it's running on a Mac. It goes to Xcode, which does the build, comes back, and you see the iOS simulator. And almost there. Okay, so here's the app, right? So it's green and it's got red and blue. So where did it get all of that? That wasn't in my XAML at all. So the reason it's working this way is because of this one line of code, and that is, hang on, that's this guy, style sheet CSS, which is weird because I'm styling my XAML with CSS. The point is, you don't have to do this. It's an option. This is pretty standard CSS. So if you have a web app and a mobile app, now you can style them both, and you can kind of maybe share the styles. This one is just like named labels. Every label inside of a stack layout, I want them to be blue. Every button, I want them to be red. So it's just nice. And this caret symbol is the only thing your linters are going to complain about, but otherwise it's just CSS. You can also bring in like Sass or less. It all works. And then take a look at this one line of code here, direction, RTL. If you're, again, building mobile apps, it really works if you can customize it, if you can localize it for different locales. And this is where, if it's right to left languages, it's just one line of code. It's not just text. It just switches the entire rendering, and it's real nice. So that's just CSS with XAML. Works with other things as well, on other platforms as well. Now let me switch around the main screen, which is where we started, to a different main screen, right? And same code base, and I'm just going to fire this up, but you can already guess what I'm about to do here. I'm going to change that as my startup project and go run. We'll give it a second. Visual Studio is thinking. Okay. So what you see here is a native Mac desktop application, right? But written purely with Xamarin.Forms. I'm throwing in some of our UI just to kind of show that it works with other things as well. So this is nice because now you can write C# and XAML all the way into the Mac desktop. And all that I did here in the Mac project, there is nothing that's Mac specific. There is just a new window that we're newing up, and we are doing this one line of code, forms.init. This is how we initialize Xamarin.Forms, right? So you'll see this everywhere in iOS or Android as well. This is where we are saying, hey, Cocoa Pods or storyboards, don't do your thing. Let Xamarin.Forms do the painting for you. And there you have a Mac desktop application with Xamarin.Forms. And just to kind of prove this, I can switch this back, right? So same exact code. I mean, and this is the XAML, which is all busy. That's rendering like the 2 gauges that you see. And if I run this thing now, you should see the same UI just on an iOS device now. So what we are talking about is really just code sharing between desktop and web and things. It's a little bit off with the UI, but you get the point, right? So this is very nice. And I can build a WPF app with Xamarin.Forms. I can build web stuff now with Xamarin.Forms. So this is all exciting and nice new development that's coming up. Let me show you a few more things here while we are on Visual Studio. Let's look at this guy. And we are going to fire this right away. And while it's coming up, it's going to let our Android emulator come up in a second. Anybody heard about Blazor? This is from Microsoft. Yeah, I see Mike going like that. Oh, I can apparently be very loud if I hold my microphone close by. OK, so this is for web applications. Blazor is meant for web applications to be running on WebAssembly client-side, but you can actually take it and put it inside of a native app as well. You can build PWAs, absolutely, but this is a native app, and if I go increment, it works. Everything is client-side, obviously, this being an Android device. So if you look at the code here, this is a Razor view. This is kind of what you expect from a web application. It is still using Xamarin.Forms actually under the covers. So here's a label, and this is a counter. So this is almost like the React component model just done with .NET. And it works. It works just like you expect. Here is the app.cs, which is exactly how you spin up a ASP.NET application. And here's the counter component. So it just has some button, label, and here's some C# code that's just running. And this app will run just fine on web as well as on mobile, right? So just a lot of variety, a lot of choices. Let me show you one other thing here. I think I had it open in Visual Studio Code. OK, so remember I talked about Tizen? Tizen gives you a nice SDK as well. You can get it from Visual Studio on Mac, Visual Studio on Windows, as well as VS Code. So once you do that, you do File, New Project, Tizen application, and they give you emulators, which take forever to come up, because these are like the Samsung Tizen, like the TV emulator and other things. But you also get the phones and the watches. Anyone have a Gear watch from Samsung? That's running Tizen, right? So this is nice. So here I can take straight up Xamarin.Forms, and instead of just a regular content page, I can just make it a circle page, and that's all. Inside of it, I can do a grid, I can do a stack layout, and I can put almost everything that Xamarin.Forms comes out of the box with inside of a Tizen application. And it takes forever, so I'm just going to show you a screenshot. Trust me, it works. Yeah, it's this guy, right? So this is what you get when you run that thing. You get a choice of like multiple emulators, and then Xamarin.Forms just lights up on Tizen, right? So more and more choices is what I'm showing you. OK, 13 minutes left before Mike comes and tackles me down. All right, let's talk about maybe some web stuff, more WebAssembly stuff. So this is Uno platform. I could show you this if I run Windows as a VM, but it's going to take us a while to spin that up and get Visual Studio. Maybe I can give it a shot and talk through it while Windows and Visual Studio spins up. Come on. Maybe not. It is taking forever to load. Let's talk through this. So essentially, here's what Uno will do for you. For those of you in the room who are old, like I am, you will remember Silverlight, because this is essentially pure XAML running in a web browser, right? Pure C#, pure XAML running in a web browser through a WebAssembly. You can edit some of this XAML. You can see, I mean, they got probably all of Windows UI XAML controls running on the web, right? And this is easy. You can take actually Xamarin.Forms XAML, also run it on the web. I mean, should you do this on production today? Yeah, maybe early days, but this is coming. And this will be nice where you can run C# and XAML back on the web. I think Uno does a really good job of bringing it. They have renderers essentially that render on WebAssembly, and it's real nice. Let's look at this JavaScript side of the family real quick. So this is one I was talking about. I mean, Flutter and React Native, they have very, very similar dev experiences. You get the CLI tools, you fire up a new application, and then you deploy to the iOS or Android simulators. This is exactly the same, except I'm going to show you something that's really nice to kind of play around with. So this is NativeScript, and if I mean, you can get all the documentation, the SDKs for Visual Studio, you can get CLI, but the easiest way to kind of play around with this is a web-based tool. So if I go to play.nativescript.org, that's a playground, essentially. So essentially, this thing spills up. It's in browser, so you don't have to install anything. You can just play around with this. And you get different types of application types. So would you want to do NativeScript with Angular, or with pure JavaScript, with pure TypeScript, or Vue? So you get to play around with all of these things. And we also have like React Native stuff. So let's begin with just pure JavaScript. So if you do that, well, actually, let me go to Angular. You'll see the difference. If you ask for Angular, then you get a component, a true HTML component, a TypeScript file, CSS file, app-based, app-level CSS, app-level components. You get all of that. It's a pure component model. And then if you go to pure JavaScript, things change, because now you don't have HTML. Now this XML looks very much almost like XAML, and that's the point. It's just XML, just describing a visual tree very much like what you would do with an Android application. And then you get one JavaScript file, maybe MVVM patterns if you want. Now here's the beauty of this playground, and let me try showing you this and see if it'll work. I'm going to bring up Reflector here. And my phone is on the same Wi-Fi, so I should be able to see my Mac. It's asking me to enter a code. OK, so that's my phone that you're looking at, OK? So now let me make this guy a little small so we can put things side by side. Where was it? Reflector, here. So what's the dev experience here? I can go in here, and I can open up a QR code and open up a Playground app, scan a code right there, and I see the app running on my phone, right? And this is for iOS and Android. Now, behind the scenes, there is Webpack. So if I change things, notice the iPhone comes up here. So if I change things here to, let's say, method, and if I just like save the file, it shows up right away on my phone, right? So the dev experience is very, very fast. You'll get the exact same experience with React Native, with Flutter, right? And the web technologies have the luxury of doing this because they don't have to deal with the whole .NET compilation story and the runtimes. They can just only push out what you need. So again, if you're building any type of SPA-based web applications with Angular, React, or Vue, take a look at some of these JavaScript frameworks, because they will give you full API access on every iOS or Android device. And then for the UI, you can really go with any of the UI that's baked in, or you can build your own components. It's really a good story when it comes to the JavaScript native apps. All right, so let me switch back. I'm going to skip the Visual Studio demo. It's going to take forever to load up, but I'm here all day. Let's go back and talk about, or kind of take it from where we left off. So a lot of things, a lot of choice, right? Which one should you pick? And it really depends. Depends on your expertise. Depends on what else are you doing? What other applications are you building? What is a code base that you want to maintain for the next 5 years going forward? Because this is a technology decision that should not be taken lightly, because you are going to be maintaining that code base. You should not hate it, right? So the good news is, no matter what you pick, you get very, very mature tooling all across for JavaScript and .NET. And you get full native API access, native UI if you wanted to. PWAs are a different story. Flutter may be a slightly different story, but for the most part, native UI. And performance is really, really good. So I'm excited with the mobile space. It's just maybe just a lot of options. But again, choose something that you are comfortable with and you can live with for the next few years. And hopefully you're happy. So I'm going to stop right here. Again, think about the ammunition we have as developers to build apps of every type. We have all the best tooling, all the best cloud services to kind of really light up app experiences and keep having our users come back. And again, let's be the best we can. Let's make an inclusive industry where everybody enjoys what they're doing and make the world a better place, right? So I'm going to stop right here. Again, you can reach out to me on this social handle if you need anything. But otherwise, I'm going to hang out here for the rest of the day. And I appreciate all of you a lot, right? So thank you. Any questions?